Upon looking for the next topic of one of my videos, I start to ask some friends what are some interesting topics I should try to debunk. At first, I couldn't find anything, but then a friend texted me a video from hip-hop artist Hotep Jesus and his opinions about slavery, and I just have to say, they're pretty batshit crazy. Like, he doesn't believe in the transatlantic slave trade type crazy. So today, I'm going to go to his interview with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience and try to sort fact from fiction.
The other psyop is the fact that we were the natives. We were not brought here on slave ships. That's not economically sound. And Christopher Columbus got here, Christopher Columbus got to the Caribbean, according to a primary source.
Right.
They basically said the first thing he did was take slaves. He didn't bring slaves, he took slaves from the island. No, natives are the melanated African being that has come here since the beginning of the Mali Empire. We're talking about 14th, 13th century.
There's a lot to unpack there, so let's just go one step at a time. As you can see, Hotep Jesus claims that the Native Americans Christopher Columbus enslaved were Africans who migrated here between the 13th and 14th century from the Mali Empire. However, this cannot be further from the truth. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to the island of Hispaniola and other Caribbean islands. He experienced was a Native American group called the Taino, who had no African ancestry. Though it is true Columbus and other colonizers did enslave the Native Americans did not possess any African ancestry. No island in the Caribbean can trace its roots back to 13th and 14th century Africa. Native Americans came to North and South America through the Bering Strait, which was a land bridge during the Ice Age that connected Asia and what is now modern-day Alaska. According to Jesus' logic, people didn't come to the Americas until the Mali Empire in the 13th and 14th century. But that still can't be true because there's no scientific nor historic evidence that the Mali people did transatlantic voyages to North America. Moreover, using carbon dating, we can date Native American tools back to before the 12th century, showing that natives have lived in America since 8000 BC, a full 9,000 years before Jesus' fake expeditions. In a sense, the Native Americans here were Native Americans. They were not from Africa. They're not some lost race of Africans who sailed across the Atlantic. Instead, they were natives to America who came to America in 8000 BC through the Bering Strait. Saying anything but that, in my opinion, is denying the atrocious history of Native Americans and how the European colonizers committed genocide against them. I understand the want of Jesus to have his African ancestors be the original founders of America. However, this should not be done at the expense of fake history and another marginalized group.
I don't believe it.
What do you mean you don't believe it?
I don't believe that story.
You don't believe that Africans were brought over on slave ships?
Correct.
Do you believe that some Africans came over here in slave ships or none?
Very minimal.
Very minimal, really?
Very minimal.
So you think it's a myth?
Almost.
Jesus fucking Christ. I know I can easily go piece by piece and explain how the transatlantic slave trade definitely existed and how there's thousands of separate journal entries documenting over 20 million slaves coming to the New World and how about half of them died on the Middle Passage. But that won't convince this moron, because he has it ingrained in his mind that Europe has some grand conspiracy to fake slavery, which makes no sense because it's one of the worst atrocities in human history. But instead, I will read an excerpt from Equiano, who wrote an autobiography about his time as a slave. When I looked around the ship, too, and saw a large furnace of copper boiling, and a multitude of black people of every description chained together, every one of their countenances expressing dejection and sorrow, I no longer doubted my fate, and quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I fell motionless on the deck and fainted. I asked if we were not to be eaten by those white men with horrible looks, red faces, and long hair. If you think the experiences of slaves coming across from the Middle Passage are made up, then I don't know what to say. You're either an idiot or just a horrible person. Let's continue.
We taught them etiquette. We taught them running water. We brought that technology to Europe. Rome was dependent on Africa for food. Remember when the Black Plague hit Rome?
Again, a lot to unpack, but let's go step by step. When it comes to running water, Africa did not provide that to Europe. I will acknowledge that the earliest plumbing was invented by ancient Egypt, but more sophisticated plumbing was later developed by the ancient Greeks and Romans. The Romans built canals and channels which could carry water from the mountains to the cities, while the Greeks perfected hot and cold water, which allowed for the famous Roman bathhouses later on. Now, I will address food, which is another gripe I have with this statement. Yes, Rome did export some food from its African colonies, but they weren't exclusively reliant on Africa for all of its food. For instance, much of the meat that the Romans exported was from their European colonies, while food such as lettuce and fish came from what's now modern-day Turkey. This is not even mentioning how Rome didn't acquire African territories until 146 BC, which was 500 years after the founding of the Roman Empire, meaning Rome was self-sufficient for 500 years without any African imports. Like any sophisticated economy, Rome literally didn't put all their eggs in one basket. Now I need to address the Black Plague, which is another blatant lie. Hotep Jesus will have you believe that Africans cured the Black Plague for the Roman Empire, keyword Roman, which is hard to believe considering the Roman Empire dissolved in 476 and split into the Eastern and Western Roman Empires. The Western Roman Empire dissolved in 480, while the Eastern Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, which was around during the time of the Black Plague, but it was a shadow of its former self. Hotep Jesus makes it sound like Africans saved the Roman Empire, which again was the Holy Roman Empire and not the true Roman Empire of Caesar and Constantine. Also, I call bullshit on his claim that they cured the Black Plague. The bubonic plague was cured by a man named Alexandre Yersin, who was a French doctor. Guess what? France is in Europe. Additionally, the Black Plague didn't stop from African advice. It was stopped because everyone in Europe either gained immunity or they just straight up died. Again, we see Hotep Jesus trying to change history to fit his political narrative.
The wealthy so-called black people in America. Why don't we know that there were black slave owners in America?
Can we just acknowledge that this guy always points his eye down when he thinks he makes a really good point, when he's really just saying just stupid bullshit? Though this is by far the least controversial thing Hotep Jesus talks about, I still believe his comments on black slave ownership need to be addressed. I too think that we need to acknowledge that African empires enriched themselves through slavery, most of which are still reaping the benefits to this day. This was a topic my Africana Studies professor brought up to our class, and it shocked me that we never talk about this subject. However, the reason we do not talk about black slaveholders in America is because they were such a small minority of the slave-owning population. To me, talking about black slave owners shifts the blame from white Americans to black Americans, and is a classic whataboutism. I've also seen the alt-right use black slave ownership as a talking point, almost to justify the action. I will also note within my Africana Studies class, my professor had a full week focusing on black slave owners, and frankly, it was very enlightening. But this was a high-level college class, not elementary school. Teaching first graders that blacks own slaves can have major repercussions in their understanding of slavery. In my opinion, elementary school kids need to be taught a Sesame Street version of history so that they have a basic understanding of what happened, which will eventually lead to deeper conversations. I do hope many of you got something out of this, because frankly, I want to educate people about the dangers of misinformation. Whether you are a member of the alt-right, a black or white nationalist, or just a conspiracy theorist, saying dumb, made-up things hurts everybody. Thank you for watching, and remember to like and subscribe for more content.